This is the first video in the three-part series of Online and Hybrid Course Design Basics. My name is Lauren Foss-Goodman. I'm the Dean of Teaching and Learning Innovation at Berkshire Community College, and I hope that this will help you think through your own online course design. I want to start with some assumptions. I think this can be helpful for faculty to hear, especially if you're really new to online teaching. The first assumption that I enter into this with is that this is a lot of work. Building high quality online and hybrid courses takes a lot of time, especially at first, because you're doing planning on paper, you're figuring out what your basic formula for your course is going to be, and then you're building in the learning management system. Ultimately, you'll be able to save time because you'll be able to duplicate, you'll be able to import, but it is a lot of work. I encourage you to work together as much as possible. And as with any technology, as you're planning, as you're building, think about what your backup plan will be. How might you provide these materials or these experiences to students in an alternate format if you have to? It's helpful to think about that right from the start. I will say this again and again, but the more planning that you do before you even touch Canvas, before you go into your learning management system, the more effective and efficient you will be with your time. It is a lot easier to make changes, what I call on paper. So if you're using a Word document or Google Docs, however you're planning it out, even in a notebook, it is much easier to do that planning, make those revisions, really look at that, get feedback on your plan before you go into using the technology. If you start with the technology, I think you will become frustrated because you will make not the best decision about a tool that you're going to use or some way that you're setting up the course. You'll put a lot of time into that, realize you need to change it, and that is a very frustrating feeling. It's a lot less frustrating if you make all of those changes on paper before going into the tech. And the most important assumption that I have about online and hybrid teaching is that the teaching always comes first, and that the technology, as much as possible, should not drive your teaching choices. I know that can be hard, but that's why I always want you to think about and start with your teaching goals, your teaching values, your student learning outcomes, and start designing from there. Rather than getting right into Canvas, the tools, and what Canvas can do. This is so key because it's really the teaching that matters in online teaching. Now that we've got our basic assumptions, let's go into our fundamental course decisions. Your student learning outcomes should always drive every design choice you make. So you want to start with those student learning outcomes and then use backward design processes to choose other really key course components, such as assessments or how students will demonstrate their learning and demonstrate those outcomes. What sorts of activities, assignments, formative assessments are students doing along the way? And what kinds of materials, tools, resources, videos, whatever it is that students need to prepare to be successful on those assignments, on those assessments, and to ultimately demonstrate those student learning outcomes. So starting with your outcomes is key, and that is going to be one of your foundations for building your online and hybrid course. Make sure that you feel really good about your outcomes, both at the course level, at the unit level, at the module level, even down to the assignment level. So make sure that you feel really good about those student learning outcomes, that they're measurable, and that you can use those to design backwards, because that's going to guide your whole course design process. One of the most important fundamental decisions you'll make has to do with what is going to happen synchronously in your course, what is going to happen asynchronously in your course. I have another video that I will share with you that will go into this in more detail, but at a very high level, you want to think about what has to happen face-to-face if that's available to you, and if it's not, then what has to happen via Zoom or Google Hangouts or some other sort of video conferencing that has to happen synchronously, where you and your students are working together at the same time. And then what can be asynchronous, and that's typically delivered via Canvas. This is a really fundamental decision, and so as you're planning, as you're working through your student learning outcomes and your backward design, you'll want to think about what must be synchronous and what can be asynchronous. I share these examples of synchronous and asynchronous activities not to go into each one right now. Again, I have a video that goes into this topic in more detail. But what I want to encourage you to think about is what really must be synchronous and what can be asynchronous. And only you know what's right for your students. But what I do want to say as you're making these fundamental decisions about your course is that typically asynchronous activities offer more flexibility to families and to students, especially right now, who are competing for bandwidth in the house or a quiet place to interact, or just time on a Zoom meeting or devices. So thinking about like trying to really expand your ideas about what can be asynchronous that maybe in the past you had always done synchronously is a really good way to consider how to meet students' diverse learning needs. The last really high-level fundamental course design decision I want to share with you is to think about meaningful ways to organize your course content. So when you work in Canvas, you're most likely going to be designing modules, and you want to think about a logical, recurring organizational principle for those modules. So for example, weeks is an organizing principle. You might do week 1 of class, week 2 of class. You might want to organize around a content unit or a topic, or maybe you rely heavily on a textbook or some other course material, but think about what the logical way to organize content will be, because that will not only help you with your planning, it will help students stay on track as they work their way through the course. When we have traditional classes, the organizing principles are sort of laid out for us, right? We have the work week, Monday through Friday. We have the school day. We have times within the day. All of those are sort of laid out for us, and we're not necessarily thinking about them, or maybe we weren't the ones that planned them. In your online course, you will need to think about how to logically structure that experience for students. And so thinking about the meaningful ways you can organize your content and your activities into those big buckets, so for example, by weeks or modules, is really, really important. Think about the rhythm of your course and aim for consistency. Time can be manipulated in some ways in online and hybrid courses, or it can function a little bit differently. So really think about how time should work in your courses. A lot of times I see faculty have due dates on Fridays, and their reasoning is very sound. It's very student-centered. They are reasoning that they want students to get their work done, get it out of the way, and then have their weekend to themselves. However, if you really think that through, that student is probably also at BCC, that student is probably working. In your context, your students might need help from their parents who are working. And so having a due date on a Friday could actually be more stressful for that student and that family. And then also think about your own time and when you'll be giving feedback and when you'll be grading. So faculty may not want to spend their weekend grading and giving feedback and aren't going to do that until Monday anyway. So in a lot of time, in a lot of contexts, having a Sunday due date could be better and more supportive of students and then those supporting them with online learning, and then also supportive of your schedule. So thinking about when are you available to provide feedback and interact with students, and then when should your assignments and activities in your course be due when you're designing those asynchronous activities in the learning management system. So that comes down to thinking about pacing, recurring due dates. Consistency is really key. So if you can have due dates and activities happen on the same days of the week, that can help families and students get into that rhythm. And then you'll also think about in the learning management system how much you want to show to students at one time, because you have the ability to hide content and to show content. And usually you don't want to show too much at once. You want to just make visible to them what is most important, most meaningful to them in that moment, and what they need to do sort of in that week or in that 2 weeks, whatever you've chosen for your unit of time for that course. That wraps up our really, really high level overview of your fundamental decisions that you should be thinking about. And in the next video in this series, we will get a little bit deeper into cognitive load theory, the way that you can organize content, and then also student engagement strategies that you can incorporate into your online course design. So please check out part 2.